It's good to be back at B-Sides. It's been a few years. Just a round of applause for the volunteers today and everybody else coming together to make this a reality again. My name's Nolan Reisbeck. Like she said, I'm a platform engineer at MasterCard. I've been there for a little while, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about certificate transparency logs and the dangers that lie therein. I left Oakland 3 or 4 years ago. I moved back home to Bend. I'd probably rather be skiing or sailing, but I was thrilled to have the opportunity to come back and present at B-Sides this year. So I've got 2 dogs, and my girlfriend is at home. She couldn't make it, but I also do want to thank her for putting up with me in the last couple weeks of trying to pull this all together. So her patience is appreciated. So a little overview of the talk here. I do want to talk just kind of about different types of SSL certificates. I know this is a deep dive, but I want to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page and talking about the same things. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of certificate transparency logs, why we need them, and how we got here, how we arrived at the need for them. There's a little bit of a history lesson in there. We're going to talk a little bit about the process of how your certificate request becomes published into a certificate transparency log, as well as what that whole process and how all the parts and pieces fit together when you go off and request a certificate until you get that certificate back. We're going to talk a little bit about commercial and homebrew solutions for monitoring the various logs that are out there. We'll do a little quick detour into kind of a live stream of a certificate transparency log. And then I've got a little bit of a demo to go through, and then we're going to wrap things up by talking a little bit about like tying it all together. Certificate transparency logs for the blue team defenders, as well as people that may consider themselves more on the red team side of things or purple team, how you can use and abuse certificate transparency logs, and what all is out there to find. And then we'll have a little bit of Q&A time after that. So a brief primer on certificate transparency logs. We've got 3 different types of SSL certificates out there. The vast majority of SSL certificates, when they're issued, are going to be domain verified. And what that means is that you just have to present some modicum of control over the record for the domain that you're requesting, whether that's a verification or validation through some well-known file at a path, like an HTTP request. You can also demonstrate ownership of the domain that you're requesting for via a text record. So that's another DNS record type. Generally speaking, you'll get some sort of random string to plug into the value of that text record. And then the certificate issuer or the certificate authority issuing that certificate will then go and wait some time, look up the value of the text record. If it matches the value that they provided you and told you to put it in there, they will turn around and do what they need to do on their side and then hand you back a certificate. So kind of generally speaking, that's the flow for domain verification through Let's Encrypt or the Acme process. But there are other CAs out there that will do like email verification or things like that. So big takeaway there, DV certificates are probably what you're getting unless you're going out of your way to do a lot more paperwork, which I don't enjoy, and I'm sure you probably don't too, but we will cover those here briefly. Type number 2, we have an OV certificate, or organization validated. And what that means is that if you go out and request a certificate for like a business, Widgets Co., you would probably want a little bit more rigor around the process of that. So The CA will require some paperwork. They will basically, well, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself there. The requestor, when you go off and request an OV certificate, you'll provide a little bit more information to them. They'll put a couple of OIDs on there, which are just object identifiers, in the certificate field. I've thrown a couple up there just for reference. They're not important. You don't need to memorize those. So basically, you just have to provide an expanded certificate subject on there that just says, this is, for example, company incorporated in some town, California. They'll go off and basically use one of like 4 or 5 different business database verifications to say, yeah, some company, example company, is incorporated in that state, and then they'll turn around and issue your certificate. So third and final type, we have an extended validation, an EV certificate. So generally speaking, you'll kind of see these types of certificates used for financial processing, credit card transactions, things like that. You would generally hope that your bank is probably using these. There is significantly more rigor around these certificates and the process there. And it is up to the CA, or the issuing authority, on that to do that validation. So the certificate authority and browser forum will set the validation requirements. There's like 4 different 200-page docs out there if you want to go through and read those. We're not going to talk about too much of that right now, but the primary purpose of an extended validation certificate would be to identify the actual legal entity that controls a website, or that domain, I should say. So you're generally not going to see those through the phishing or stuffing campaigns, the lookalikes, and those will just be generic certificates. But one kind of big thing to note there is that the big browsers out there don't really make it very evident. They used to, the EV certificates will give you a little green padlock. There used to be a little bit more, but there's not too much more to the user. If you're going to your bank and logging in and you see the little padlock icon up there next to the bar, you're probably not going to go inspect that certificate to make sure that there's an OID on it. As an end user, you don't really care about that kind of thing. So the CAB validation requirements, like I said, the primary purpose is to identify the legal entity that controls the domain, and secondarily, to make it more difficult for fraud and other types of identity attacks to happen. However, an EV certificate is not intended to represent or warrant that the legal entity named in the certificate is actually currently still doing business, or that it is compliant with local laws in their jurisdictions. Or furthermore, I put this as 3, but it's also kind of important to talk about. By getting an EV certificate, the CAB and the CA is not actually attesting to your trustworthiness or honesty as a business entity. They just want their money, and they're going to issue you the certificate. They've done a little bit more checking into kind of who you are, and it's also not safe to assume that you can do business with this company presenting the certificate. So that being said, they just wanted to put that out there. It's in one of their documents. It's up at the very top. But they will turn around and issue the certificate. They've just done their homework and can attest that the legal entity requesting that certificate actually represents that domain. So organization types, we did talk about this just a little bit. There's 4 different organization types that, when you go and request an EV certificate, they will bucket your request into a particular type of entity, and that will be published on the certificate. A private organization is generally going to be the vast majority of companies that would request a certificate like that. your LLCs are limited in the UK, GmbH in Germany, and limited liability partnerships. There's also government entities. I think that's kind of obvious. So like the NIH or the IRS, a government entity, and that entity's legal existence was established by the political powers in the jurisdiction in which they operate, and they have said, yes, you are the revenue service for the US. You may have a .gov TLDN domain. Business entities, this is a little murky. It's kind of general partnerships, unincorporated associations, joint ventures, and sole proprietorships. And then there's also non-commercial entities, so nonprofits, academic institutions, higher education, things like that. So here's where we get into a little bit of the need. So in 2011, there was well, there still is a CA. Komodo had a little bit of an oopsie daisy. And Moxie Marlinspike gave a really good talk on this a while back. It was probably 5, 6, 8 years ago. But on March 15th, it was discovered that the registration authority Instant SSL, which was an issuer for Komodo, had a little bit of a security incident. And using this registration authority, at the time, unknown person went and issued 9 certificates across 7 domains for some pretty big companies: Google, Yahoo, Skype, Mozilla, Microsoft, and then one final one down here, Global Trustee with the serial. It was never really ascertained what that certificate was issued for. It was not issued for a valid domain, and kind of the running theory, and at least the one that's still kind of accepted this time, is that that was a certificate that may or may not have been used, likely may have been used for login to maybe some more of the backends that exist in the CA world. The Yahoo one up here in bold, this serial number, was the only certificate that was issued by this attacker that was ever seen in the wild. And so what that means is that this person went and issued all of these certificates for mail.google.com. You know, you go log into your Gmail. If they had the opportunity to do that, and were, let's say, for example, running the Wi-Fi in your hotel, they could use that certificate, and that would allow them to redirect the traffic from actual Gmail to something presenting itself as Gmail. Probably looks the same, probably acts the same, until you click login. And the whole point of that was credential harvesting. But of those, let's say 8 certificates, the login.yahoo one from this breach that was issued by Komodo was the only one that was ever actually seen to be used. The rest of them, nobody at the time really had any idea what this person was up to, what their plans were, or what might happen. But the, after the fact, there was somebody that did publicly claim on the internet. They posted a paste bin document dump, basically saying, here's who I am, I take responsibility for this. And generally, kind of at the time, people were just kind of, skeptical about that. There was a few security researchers out there that were like, I don't know, it seems like you might just be trying to take credit for this, for the glamour. But they did end up supplying a little bit of evidence that moved those claims from the realm of skepticism into, oh boy, this might be a problem. After that, so that was back on March 15th of 2011. So a few months later, in August, during the summer, there was a gentleman in Iran that posted this very innocuous looking kind of plea for help. He seemed very baffled at the time by it. But he found the now defunct, this screenshot was a nightmare to track down. I could not find it. All of the links are dead. Google's replaced all of their product forums, but I did finally find it. But he said, I tried it basically, in essence, I tried to log into Gmail, and I got a certificate warning in Chrome. You know, just that little red box that says this certificate is invalid. He said, I took a screenshot and I saved that certificate to a file. Here's that certificate file and a screenshot. He uploaded it to Mediafire, and then he said, here's the text of this decoded fake certificate. Posted it on Pastebin for other people to look at, and he said, and then I logged into my VPN, and I went to Gmail again, and it worked just fine. What's going on? There was like a thing at Komodo that happened that I had heard about, but that was really kind of it. And what I found most amusing about this post was one that it was just kind of in a dark corner of the web, on the Google product forums under the off topic, the coffee shop, if you will. So just, hey, I noticed something weird going on with Google today, which I don't know if anyone has ever dealt with end user support, but you get a lot of requests and things like that. Hey, this is kind of weird. And 9 times out of 10, they don't really pan out. But unfortunately for all of us, this gentleman was actually spot on with that. So August 28th, let's just kind of keep that date in mind. So that was 7 months after the initial Komodo breach. It's a little hard to see here, so I'm going to squint at my screen. So basically, the public timeline of this was there was another breach. This time it was through another CA called DigiNotar. And so August 28th, third line down there, was when our little friend posted his message to the support forum. Is this a man-in-the-middle attack to Google's SSL? July 10th was the date of the actual certificate issuance. Somebody went and breached DigiNotar. We don't know when. We do now, but at the time we didn't. But somebody went out and looked and said, okay, that certificate that he posted on there, you can go look at it. You can see the not valid for before date. You can see it was issued July 10th. There was a few more certificates issued for Google subdomains, but the last one was issued on July 20th. So a 10-day time span, and then basically a month after those certificates stopped being issued is when the world generally found out about it. Immediately, the minds over at Google sprung into action, and on July 29th, they basically posted a statement saying that they were aware that a certificate had been issued by this CA for a domain that they controlled, and they assured everybody that they did not request it. There was a statement that was made by Mozilla the same day and Microsoft as well. So the folks over at the CAB forum, they're generally pretty responsive to each other. And when problems like this arise, it's generally a pretty cohesive thing. And so the consensus is that that certificate would be distrusted in the browsers, Chrome, Mozilla, and Internet Explorer, Edge, etc. The day after that, Vasco, the parent company of DigiNotar, issued a public statement basically kind of downplaying it. Now, if you're following along, that was 51 days after the fraudulent certificates had been issued, which isn't really a great look. They kind of slow rolled that, and they really didn't say too much about it. They said that they were kind of looking into it, and basically said that it really wasn't too much of a cause for concern. which I think we can all agree it should have been. The roundup of all of the certificates that were issued by DigiNotar in this whole fiasco were published to a mailing list on F-Secure. I think that there was, let's see here, there was quite a few of them. And on September 1st, Chromium and Google revoked 257 certificates issued by DigiNotar. And then they revoked DigiNotar's root certificate. Now, if you're a CA and your entire business purpose is to provide trust, and you're out there issuing certificates for entities and domains that the actual controller of that domain didn't ask for, and you don't know where they went, that doesn't really instill confidence in the public and isn't very trustworthy. So as a CA, basically the only thing that you have is your word and your processes and procedures for why that's not going to happen. And if it does, that trust kind of evaporates, and there's not really much reason for you as a CA to exist anymore. So September 2nd, Mozilla issued a follow-up statement basically confirming the same exact thing, saying that they would also follow suit with the Chromium project. They would be blacklisting all of the, they would be revoking all the certificates in Mozilla and basically disallowing those to be trusted. So if somebody was using that certificate and an end user went and navigated to a website and that website presented that certificate, big old banner. September 3rd, the Dutch government also revoked trust in the DigiNotar root. Now this is also kind of important because the Dutch government used DigiNotar as their primary CA for a lot of things like taxes and healthcare and things like that. So Chromium's out, Mozilla's out, the Dutch government is out, and things are not really looking so good for DigiNotar. September 5th, the interim report on what happened there was published. The same day that that report was published, DigiNotar decided it was finally time to pick up the phone and report the breach to the Dutch police. Shortly after that, the next week, they officially filed for bankruptcy. And the day after that, a Dutch court basically accepted their bankruptcy filing, that they would cease to operate as a legal entity in the Netherlands and issue no more certificates, wanted or unwanted. So that's the public timeline. Now we get to go into what really happened. DigiNotar was compromised way back on June 6th, which is far before August, when our friend posted that to the Google forums. July 10th, there was a wildcard certificate issued for google.com. And so that's not just mail.google.com. That could be anything else under that single subdomain Google. You could use that certificate to do all sorts of awful and terrible things. And that certificate was not revoked until about a month and a half later, on August 29th. So just a few days after the problem was surfaced in that product forum. July 10th, somebody over at DigiNotar noticed an automated test had failed to work. Raise your hand if you work in an organization that uses Jenkins or something else like that to run CI testing, and tests fail a lot, right? And you go, yeah, that broke. It's probably not a very big deal. We'll look at it. It's Friday afternoon, 2 o'clock. I'll look at it on Monday. I'm not saying that that's what happened, but somebody over there noticed that on July 10th, one of their integration tests failed. And that integration test, basically what that integration test did was that it went out and looked at all of the certificates that that CA issues, and it looked at all of the requests. Please sign me a certificate for google.com. I've issued you a certificate for google.com. However, things didn't line up, and that was kind of the big problem. They realized that there was a whole bunch of certificates out there that they had no requests for. And so they went and fixed that test. Took about a week. And the administrative records, like I said, the administrative, the number of requests and the number of issued certificates in the end just didn't match up. That's all that test was meant to show. July 20th, they found a script somewhere, presumably on one of those agents, or, I'm just positing here. One of the systems that was running the tests, they found a little bit of leftover cruft that wasn't cleaned up. So the attacker didn't really clean up after themselves, and they kind of shot themselves in the foot there. They also found out that there was even more certificates that hadn't been requested that were issued. On July 27th, they engaged an external security firm. The official report that was furnished to the Dutch government and everybody else on the internet never actually said who the initial firm was. I did not ever find that out, but I would love to know. And that report basically just showed that some server sitting out there in their infrastructure in one of the DMZs had been compromised by an unknown entity using a known vulnerability in the .NET nuke software that server ran. So yet again, another known vulnerability that hadn't been patched on a server sitting out there wide open on the internet. That story should be very familiar now at this point. It was discovered that one of the rogue certificates had been verified by an IP address originating in the Islamic Republic of Iran. So basically, when you're out there navigating around on the web, your browser, whatever it will be, will say, yep, that's fine and good. I see that certificate. I verified the chain. It does look valid, but there's a little bit more that goes on in the background that needs to happen in order for that certificate to actually be verified. So they saw that some browser in Iran had requested to verify that certificate. August 28th, as we know, we talked about this already, that is when our friend posted that innocuous message in the Google product forums. August 29th, that certificate was revoked. And then August 30th, there was another IT firm called Fox IT that was hired by DigiNotar. They kind of specialize in digital forensics and things like that. And they were the author of the final report that was eventually published and furnished to everybody. So why do we need certificate transparency logs? The aftermath of the DigiNotar breach, 531 certificates were issued between July 10th and July 20th, used in monster in the middle attacks against Google, Gmail, Yahoo, Skype, Mozilla, Microsoft Tor, and and others. Kaspersky researcher, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that last name, basically said in a public blog post, according to DigiNotar, they are not able to track which rogue certificates they generated. So they issued 531. They had no idea what those certificates were. There was nothing actually reconciling, not a single log file saying, I issued a certificate for Gmail. I issued a certificate for login.yahoo. No such accounting. If you don't know what you're issuing, you're probably not counting how many you're issuing. So they didn't know how many rogue certificates were out there. Either DigiNotar performs no logging of the certificates they create, or their logs got cleaned out in the attack. So a little bit of benefit of the doubt there. Chris Wazinski from Sophos said they found all of the certificates except for the google.com one. What other sites were at risk from visiting earlier? Were those certificates for Microsoft, Yahoo, or PayPal? Spoiler alert, they were. When he published that, the full list of certificates had not been yet found out. But not a good look. So CT logs, trust, no public record of certificates issued. Not who issued it, not requested, not who requested it, not how many did they issue, or was that the only one? If you have one rogue certificate issued, logic kind of follows that there was probably a lot more, but without any of those kinds of records, you don't know. Problem number 2, it takes a while to revoke certificates. You can, a CA can revoke a certificate, an end user can request a certificate be revoked, but it's not instantaneous. And the third part, notification. How do end users know that that certificate has been revoked? There was not at the time a very good valid mechanism for someone here and someone in New York reconciling those. So as a domain owner, you have no idea. You're just kind of blindly trusting at that point that CAs are doing their job like they said they would. And that they were only issuing certificates that were requested, and they weren't issuing certificates for your competitors. But users also don't really have any way of knowing is when they go to mail.google.com to log into their Gmail, is what they're logging into actually Google? The only thing that you have is that certificate. And if it says it's from Google, you're probably not going to look too much further into that. Certificates take a while to revoke. CRLs have existed for quite a long time. A client, a web browser in this case, would generally download a CRL list from a certificate authority or a CRL issuer, maybe once a day, maybe once every couple of days. It's kind of expected that your browser will check those. It'll search through the list. And if the domain that you're navigating to is on that list, it will prompt that. But your browser may be out of date on that list refresh. So no instantaneous mechanism to revoke a certificate right away. You could be waiting a day or two for that to finally show up on your browser as having been revoked. Notification, we talked about that. How are you notified that a certificate's been revoked? Whatever this is over here. How many times a day do you see that at work? I log into firewalls all the time. Certificate validation errors. Do I look at them? I have in the past. I don't regularly, I'll admit that. But you as a user, you probably see that. You go to a hotel, you try to connect to the Wi-Fi. They're running a captive portal. It says, please click here to continue. So you got to like click around in Google or in Chrome or Mozilla, click advanced. It's different for each one too, which is also kind of frustrating. Probably just close the browser and walk away, which I guess is kind of the intended purpose of that. Make it too hard to do unsafe things. So the need has been demonstrated. We need a better accounting mechanism for this. It needs to be publicly available. It needs to be trusted. We probably shouldn't let the CAs run it. They've kind of in the past demonstrated that some of them are not to be trusted. So how does this all work? A website owner, basically you submit a CSR or a request. They'll issue a pre-certificate, which is a certificate. It's just not a real one. There's a couple of bits and bytes in there that indicate that it's not to be used as an actual secure certificate. The CA then publishes that certificate, that pre-certificate, to a log. That log takes that pre-certificate. It basically stamps it with a timestamp on there and sends it right back to the CA. Now that certificate timestamp is in that certificate, it has been published to a log, it has been recorded as being in that log, the CA can now send that certificate on to you to use on your website. And then the browsers and user agents will monitor those certificates. And then all of these certificate logs that are out there are all cryptographically monitored. So not to get too in-depth on that, it's basically a Merkle tree hash, the blockchain. So they're cryptographically monitored. They are append only. You cannot, once something is published to a CT log, remove it no matter how much you beg and plead. Once it's in there forever, and no edits allowed. So CT log providers, the big ones out there: Cloudflare, DigiCert, Google Let's Encrypt, Sectigo, TrustAsia. There's a few others. I didn't really record them. We have over here the certificate, the timestamp requirements. So in order for a certificate to be trusted in the Chromium browser, the SCT has to be published to at least one log, and it can. For a certificate validity length of less than 180 days, it has to be published into 2 different CT logs. So those would ideally match up. And if they're issuing a certificate for longer than 180 days, which is pretty difficult to do now these days, you can still get them on an EV certificate, but it has to be published to 3 different logs. So the CA can publish it to the Let's Encrypt log, they can publish it to DigiCert, and they can publish it to Sectigo if they'd like to. And that will return in Chrome a completely valid certificate. There's a big red bar there for Mozilla. They have not yet, at this point, today's date, instituted a CT log requirement in the Mozilla browser. Safari has one, Chrome has one. Not sure what Mozilla is doing, but it's fine. We'll get there. They'll get there. Certificate logs. By the providers, Google maintains a whole bunch. Let's Encrypt has a few. Cloudflare's got a couple. DigiCert has a couple. There's a lot of certificates that are requested every day. There's been 9.2 billion certificates published since 2013. So you can't stick them all into one file. That would just make them too long. So what ends up happening is that the certificate logs themselves are sharded by the year of the certificate expiration. Does that kind of track for everybody? If your certificate expires in 2024, it will be published into the, for example, Argonne 2024 certificate log. I thought this was kind of a useful and interesting certificate, or a graphic here just kind of showing the uptake of the number of certificates published into each log. You can definitely see that all started to take off there in 2019, and they've basically doubled their traffic every year since. I pulled this graphic from Cloudflare. They have published some useful information here, just basically talking about, sorry, that's 4.1 trillion valid certificates floating around out there for 8.5 trillion domains. They issue a lot of certificates every day. Let's Encrypt will issue between 5 and 6 million certificates a day. So that's a lot of certificates being issued. And then this also will show the log utilization by large CAs. And this is basically just kind of showing here that some CAs prefer publishing to certain CT logs over others. And some of them are just kind of round robin. They'll publish to all of them. The CT log stream, if you want to go out there and monitor the CT logs yourself, the best way to do that that I've found up to this point is a service from CaliDog. It's a CertStream server is written in Elixir. You can plug it in. It'll monitor every CT log out there. If you want to go parse the CT logs for your own domains, be my guest. It's kind of a pain, though. So I've got up here a couple of interesting, useful utilities. Probably the best well-known one is crt.sh. That's by Sectigo. CaliDog also publishes a bunch of libraries for Python, Go, JavaScript, and they'll laugh at you if you try to use Java. It's on their website. I didn't make that up. But there's also CertSpotter, that's by SSLmate, or CertEagle. There's a few others out there. Meta has a search. If you own a domain, you can go check, plug your domain in. You can see how many certificates have been issued for your domain. If you'd like to monitor the pre-logs, you'll need to use the Certificate Transparency Log Go by Google. They forked the Go libraries for ASN encoding and Crypto X509 because the SCTs don't really conform to valid spec, so they had to make some adjustments there. I've got a quick demo here. I want to run through that. I've got just about 10 minutes left. And so basically what I wanted to take everybody through is the process of requesting a certificate through Let's Encrypt, and then using that on a honeypot, showing that basically once we go issue a certificate, there are eyes watching out there. So let me just go ahead and get out of the slideshow real quick, and we'll go ahead and get that started. Is that big enough? Oh, I'm sorry. That's on my screen. This might be interesting. Okay. A big black box. I got this here. So we're going to go ahead and generate a cert for a domain that I registered a little while ago, and that will basically point to a honeypot that I have. Thank you. All right, and we're off and going. So as you can see up there, I've registered the domain BSidesSF 2023-ctlogs.com. I've generated a random subdomain for that, and that didn't quite work. I have another one for this. Hold on one second. I've lost my mouse. That would probably be a whole lot easier, wouldn't it? Hey, there we go. Different domain. The original demo didn't want to work. Same setup, randomly generated subdomain. We'll be publishing an A record to Cloudflare, and then using that for text-based verification through Let's Encrypt. There goes the DNS challenge, and then that will go ahead and start stop, and we'll refresh everything in just one moment. This honeypot that's running, I found a very good utility. I was going to write my own and realized that that was way more effort than I wanted to put into this. I'll put it in the slides here, but there's a very, very good honeypot utility out there published by Deutsche Telekom. It's called Tpot CE, the letter T, P-O-T, and then the letter CE. That basically has 30 or 40 some odd honeypots that all run in different Docker containers. They've got a fantastic web UI. We'll go through that in just a moment. But basically what that does is it spins up a whole bunch of Docker containers that are meant to look like Elasticsearch or Redis or a whole bunch of other things. It will also monitor the SSH telnet logins and things like that. We'll go ahead and grab this here. I clicked through it. I just said that, right? Oops. I clicked the wrong one. Let's try that again. This should be the right one. We might have to wait just a moment here for Kibana to come back up. It's been collecting attacks for quite a while, so the index is rather large. This is the general kind of just Tpot user interface, and then we'll go ahead and just take a look here at the dashboards. I'm sorry. All right, so once we load in, there are quite a few dashboards. We'll give that just a moment there to catch up. Talk about those there real quick. So in the week and a half that this has been running, in the last 24 hours, this particular honeypot has been attacked 17,500 times. You can see these rather large spikes in here. This is while I was working on the presentation this morning and last night as well. And so, oops. Let's just look at the last 2 hours here. So if we go out and issue a certificate pointing at this IP address, we can see that there's been about 1,000 instances for this particular. So the top bar up here is basically just representing each of those as a different honeypot that is running on the system. We've got a very nice map of, generally speaking, where those attacks are coming from, and the user agent's country of origin, what kind of attack it was going, and then the rather amusing tag cloud of usernames and passwords down there that have been attempted to be used to log into SSH, and some of the other HTTPS logins. There's a blog that's running on there. There's a Cisco ASA firewall that's running on there, and so this is basically just collecting all of the attempts. There are another few dashboards in here if you really want to drill into other honeypots. By honeypot in there, you can see exactly what that had been collecting and everything else. Come on, it's just taking a little while. I wish I had some more time. I will leave this up if you want to take a picture of the URL up there. You're welcome to do that. Might be a little bit of a CTF to figure out what the actual web and password is on there. Okay, we'll get back to the demo here real quick, or sorry, the presentation. We'll talk about red team and blue team real quick, and then we'll have a minute or two for questions at the end. So if you find yourself defending on the defensive side of the security space, my recommendations would be to find some sort of tool out there, whether it's paid or free. There's a whole bunch of self-hosted options. And I'd like to impress on you that if you go out and monitor your organization or your own domains just once a month or once every quarter, that is far better than doing absolutely nothing at all. You probably don't need to put the effort into monitoring the actual live stream of CT logs. On a cron, 15, 20, 30 minutes should be probably just fine. How long it takes you to find out if somebody in your organization, if sales has gone out and stood up another subdomain, probably doesn't matter too much. How long it takes you to find that out if fixing that problem is going to take a few months. You can also see if CAA records work for your organization, for your use case. A CAA record basically says only this provider is allowed to issue certificates. So you can say only let's encrypt for these subdomains. I'm getting the old stop sign here. I do apologize that we didn't quite get to finish. I'll stick around, or at least outside, if you have some more questions. I've uploaded the rest of these slides and everything else to the presentation, or to Sked. So if you would like to go through these, you're more than welcome to peruse them at your leisure. Thank you so much for coming today, and enjoy the rest of your day.